The blizzard tore across the Montana mountains with a fury 72-year-old Eleanor Parker had not seen in decades. Snow swallowed her cabin, and the wind screamed through the pines like lost voices. She should have stayed inside. That's what her children would have told her. But Ellie had stopped listening to fear long ago, not since Frank died 3 winters ago. Then she heard it. Faint beneath the storm, a cry small and desperate, not the wind at all, but something alive. Her breath caught. Somewhere out there in the white wilderness, something was fighting to survive. And before she could think twice, she was already reaching for her coat. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The storm had no mercy that night. Snow swept across the Absaroka Mountains like white fire, erasing every shape, every sound, every trace of warmth. The wind moaned through the pines like a wounded thing, carrying voices that weren't there, just echoes of memory or ghosts. Inside a small log cabin buried half in ice, Eleanor Ellie Parker, 72, sat alone by the crackling fire. Her frame was small and sturdy from decades of mountain living, but her face, lined and pale under the lamplight, bore the softness of someone who had spent years loving the wrong silence. Her hair, once chestnut, now silver, hung loose around her shoulders, catching the orange glow like frost on wire. 3 years had passed since Frank Parker, her husband of 47 years, had been lowered into frozen ground behind the church in Livingston. Frank had been a forest ranger, a big man with kind eyes and a habit of humming old cowboy tunes while chopping wood. His death in a snowdrift accident left behind more than grief. It left an emptiness that echoed through the cabin each night like a second heartbeat. Ellie had tried to fill it, with radio chatter, with knitting, with endless cups of tea. But the house always fell back to silence, as if the mountains themselves demanded it. That night, the blizzard was worse than any she could remember. Even through thick logs, the cold reached in, biting her knuckles as she refilled the stove. She thought briefly of her daughter Sarah, who lived in Missoula, all warmth and modernity, always begging her mother to leave this dangerous mountain life. Sarah was 43, tall and graceful with auburn hair and a nurse's sharp eyes. Ellie loved her, but their worlds no longer fit together. Sarah spoke in schedules and phone reminders. Ellie spoke in weather. When the wind shifted, Ellie heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Faint, muffled, half swallowed by snow. At first she thought it was a hinge moaning, or maybe a trick of memory, a ghost of Frank calling her name the way he used to when he came in from patrol. But it came again. A high, broken yelp. Then silence. Then another. A cry. Not human. Not quite wind. Something in it pierced the numb shell around her heart. She stood slowly, her bones protesting, and peered through the frosted window. Beyond the porch, the world was pure chaos, white, shifting, endless. "Stay put," she muttered to herself. That's what Frank would have said, what Sarah would have screamed over the phone. But Ellie had never listened much to good advice. She reached for Frank's old forest ranger coat hanging by the door, heavy canvas, worn at the elbows, still smelling faintly of pine smoke and him. The moment she slipped it on, it was as if his arms wrapped around her again, steadying her spine. Stepping outside was like walking into another world. The snow hit her face like shards of glass, the air cutting her lungs with each breath. She pushed through. Leaning into the wind, one gloved hand gripping the porch rail, the other clutching a lantern whose flame fought for life. Every step sank ankle deep. The cry came again, faint but distinct, pulling her toward the tree line. Her heart pounded as she trudged through knee-high drifts. She wasn't built for this anymore. The cold gnawed at her legs, but that sound, it wasn't just a plea for help. It was the same trembling tone Frank had used when he'd called to her the night before he died, his voice fading through the static of a ranger's radio. Something inside her refused to ignore it. 50 yards from the cabin, near the edge of the forest, she found it, a dark shape half buried in snow, the faint outline of fur dusted white. She crouched, lantern trembling in her hand. It was a German shepherd, full-grown, her coat a mix of gray and cream. The body was still warm, but the life had already left her, a small wound along the ribs. Clean entry. No exit. A rifle shot. Ellie's throat closed. Someone had killed this animal recently and illegally. Then she heard it again, a whimper, weaker this time. She moved the mother's front leg and gasped. Beneath it, pressed into the snow, was a tiny puppy, barely breathing. Its fur was dark sable, almost black, its eyes sealed shut, its body no bigger than Ellie's trembling hands. It twitched once, let out another broken cry, and went still. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "No, not tonight." Her instincts, the same ones that had saved injured fawns and lost hikers years before, took over. She slipped the pup inside her coat, pressing it to her chest. The faint flutter of its heartbeat was barely there, like a clock winding down. "Hold on, little one," she murmured, her voice cracking in the wind. "Just hold on." The trek back felt endless. Twice she fell, catching herself against the trees. Her lungs burned, snow stung her cheeks raw, the tiny heartbeat against her chest flickered like a candle. When she finally reached the porch, she almost collapsed, kicking the door shut behind her with the last of her strength. The warmth of the fire hit her like a wave, dizzying. Ellie laid the pup on a pile of towels near the hearth. Its body was limp, breath shallow. She rubbed him gently with warm cloth, whispering nonsense words the way she once had to her children when they were small. After long minutes, the pup stirred, released a faint whimper, then another. His fur steamed slightly as the ice melted. His ears, tiny triangles of determination, twitched toward her voice. "You're a fighter," she said softly, stroking the wet fur. "A real hunter, aren't you?" The name stuck. Hunter. When she reached for her kettle to warm some milk, something caught her eye. Just outside the frosted window, her lantern still flickered where she'd dropped it, and beside it, half buried in snow, something gleamed, a small brass casing catching the firelight, a bullet, shell. Ellie stepped closer to the glass. There were tire tracks too, faint but visible through the storm, cutting across her property toward the logging road. Her stomach tightened. Someone had been up here, someone with a gun. Her pulse quickened, the old ranger's wife instincts flaring awake after years of quiet. She opened the door again just long enough to retrieve the shell. It was warm from the brass. On its side she could make out faint initials scratched into the metal. SPK. Ellie turned the casing in her palm, unease creeping up her spine. She looked at Hunter, barely breathing but alive, wrapped in her husband's coat. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. Outside, the wind howled again, only this time she could swear it carried the echo of an engine fading somewhere deep in the valley. And in the trembling firelight, something moved near the edge of the woods. A flicker of motion, too tall to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. Ellie froze, one hand on the lantern, heart hammering in her chest. The puppy whimpered softly. The figure in the woods stilled, and the night seemed to hold its breath. The storm broke by morning, leaving the Absaroka Range buried under a cruel, beautiful silence. Snow hung heavy on the pines like frozen lace, and the air shimmered with cold light. Inside the cabin, the world was all orange fire and the faint rhythm of breathing. Two lives, old and new, learning to share the same warmth. Ellie Parker sat cross-legged on the rug, her old ranger's coat still wrapped around Hunter, who slept curled in her lap. The puppy's fur had dried into a soft sable sheen, his small ribs moving steadily now. Every so often he twitched, dreaming, his paws paddling at invisible ground. Ellie smiled faintly. She hadn't smiled like that in years. When the telephone finally crackled back to life after the blizzard, she called Dr. Ben Carter, the only veterinarian for 50 miles. Ben was in his mid-50s, a tall, broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and crow's feet etched deep from years under mountain sun. He wore his graying beard trimmed short and carried himself with that quiet confidence people get from surviving more winters than they care to count. He'd lost his wife 10 years ago to cancer, and though he never spoke much about it, grief had softened his gruffness into patience. Ellie trusted him completely. He had once saved Frank's injured horse during a storm just like this one. Ben arrived just past noon in his old blue truck, tires crunching through the fresh snow. He stamped the cold off his boots, bringing with him the smell of pine, antiseptic, and strong coffee. "So," he said, kneeling by the fire, his voice rough but kind, "you've gone and adopted trouble again, haven't you?" Ellie huffed, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. He was freezing, Ben. You'd have done the same. He examined the puppy carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Male, maybe 2 weeks old. No visible fractures, though he's still weak. You did right by keeping him warm. Ben's gaze lingered on the pup's paw pads. See this pattern of callus starting? He was bred from a working line, military or K9 unit, I'd wager. Ellie frowned. You think his mother was trained? I'd bet my truck on it. Look. He pointed to a faint scar along the pup's flank. Microchip incision. Someone cut it out. Clean job too, not an animal wound. The words settled like cold metal in Ellie's stomach. She thought of the brass casing marked SPK, still on her kitchen table. Silver Peak Kennels, Ben muttered when she told him the letters. Heard about them in a report last year. Small outfit out near Red Lodge. Got fined for breeding retired police dogs without license. Thought they shut down. They didn't, Ellie said quietly. And one of their bullets killed this pup's mother. Ben met her eyes. Then whoever did it doesn't want witnesses, 2-legged or 4. That evening, after Ben left some puppy formula and promised to return in a week, Ellie settled into the rhythm of care. She warmed the milk, filled the old medicine dropper, and fed Hunter slowly, drop by drop. He swallowed eagerly now, tail flicking with each sip. When he finished, he snuggled into the crook of her arm, letting out a satisfied sigh that pierced right through the wall she'd built around her heart. Days passed. The blizzard's destruction softened into glistening stillness. Ellie shoveled the path to the shed, mended the porch railing, and spoke to Hunter as she worked, narrating her chores like he were a partner instead of a dog. He grew stronger, heavier, his eyes opening into cloudy blue that followed her everywhere. By the 10th day, he was walking clumsily, tumbling over his own paws and barking, small, sharp yips that filled the cabin with life. Ellie found herself laughing again, really laughing, and it startled her. But peace never lasted long in these mountains. One afternoon, while bringing in firewood, Ellie noticed something strange. Near the tree line, half covered by drifted snow, lay a faint impression. Tire tracks, fresh, narrow. Not from Ben's truck. They led up the slope and vanished behind the ridge. She crouched, tracing the grooves with her glove. Whoever it was had come close. Too close. That night, unable to shake the unease, she dug out an old trail camera Frank had used years ago for elk monitoring. The casing was dented, the lens scratched, but it still worked. She mounted it to the pine nearest the drive, aimed toward the clearing where the tire tracks had appeared. "Let's see who you are," she murmured. As weeks turned into a fragile routine, Hunter's personality began to bloom. He was curious, fiercely alert, often tilting his head as if analyzing the world's every sound. He learned his name within days, responding instantly to her tone. He loved shadows, chasing the light from the fire against the walls until he tired himself out. At night, he slept at the foot of her bed, breathing softly, a living warmth she hadn't known since Frank. Sometimes she caught herself whispering into the dark, "You'd like him, Frank. He's stubborn like you." The camera delivered its first surprise a week later. Ellie retrieved the memory card and loaded it into her old laptop. Most images were harmless. Deer, the wind-blown branches, a curious raccoon, but one frame made her chest tighten. A black pickup truck, no visible plate, parked at the bend near her mailbox. The next frame, 3 minutes later, showed nothing but empty snow. Ellie zoomed in on the truck's windshield. A sticker in the corner read Silver Peak Kennels. Her heart dropped. That evening, the wind returned, not a storm, just the restless sighs of the mountain. Hunter paced by the door, uneasy, his hackles lifting. Ellie turned off the lamp, staring through the curtain. The world outside was dim silver, the moon slicing through drifting mist. Then, a flicker, light flashing through the trees. A beam of a flashlight, sweeping slowly across her clearing. Her throat went dry. She reached for Frank's old hunting rifle mounted above the mantel, the one she hadn't touched since his death. The wood felt heavy, foreign in her frail hands. Hunter growled low, the sound more instinct than threat. The beam passed over the window once, then again as if searching. Ellie crouched behind the table, heart hammering. She whispered, "It's all right, boy." But her voice trembled. The light vanished. Silence rushed back in, thick as snow. For several minutes she didn't move, afraid even her breath might give her away. Finally she rose, eased to the door, and looked out through the frost-rimmed glass. Nothing, just trees, pale and silent. Yet beneath the pines, something darker than shadow shifted briefly, then was gone. Hunter barked once, sharp and defiant. Somewhere beyond the clearing, a distant engine rumbled to life, faded down the mountain road, and disappeared. Ellie stood there long after the sound had gone, the rifle still in her shaking hands. In the firelight's reflection, her face looked older, harder, but her eyes burned with something new, not just fear, but purpose. She set the rifle back on the rack, turned toward the sleeping puppy, and whispered, "We're not alone here, Hunter. And whoever you belong to, whatever they did, they're coming back." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and soundless, covering the fresh tracks that led away from her cabin. The morning sun rose pale and cold, a thin silver blade slicing through the mist. The snow had hardened overnight, crusted and sharp under Ellie's boots as she worked with a shovel, clearing the steps and path to the shed. Her breath puffed out in white clouds. Hunter, now 3 months old, bounded through the drifts beside her, his paws enormous for his body, tail wagging furiously. His coat had thickened to a warm, glossy black-brown, his eyes now a deep amber that gleamed with curiosity and unspoken intelligence. He had grown into both her guardian and her shadow. Ellie leaned on the shovel, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cold. Her joints ached more these days, her right knee stiff from an old hiking injury. Frank used to tease her about her stubborn bones, saying she'd outlast the mountain itself. She smiled faintly at the memory, but it faded as quickly as it came. The loneliness that followed him was still there, always hovering like smoke. Hunter barked suddenly, head snapping toward the tree line. His entire body went rigid, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Ellie froze, following his gaze. At first she saw nothing, just pines heavy with snow. Then movement, a dark figure stepping out from between the trees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark parka with the hood drawn up, face hidden by a scarf. His gloves were black leather. The stranger moved with the easy stride of someone who belonged in the wilderness. Ellie's heart began to pound. "Can I help you?" she called, trying to steady her voice. The man stopped about 20 feet away, his voice muffled but sharp. "You found something, didn't you? A puppy." Every instinct in Ellie's body screamed caution. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter. The dog isn't yours." Before she could respond, he lunged forward. Ellie gasped, stumbling back as he grabbed her arm. The strength in his grip was shocking for someone moving through snow. She fought back, swinging the shovel, catching his shoulder with a glancing blow. "Let go!" Hunter exploded into motion, snarling with a sound Ellie had never heard before, raw, feral. The puppy launched himself at the man's arm, teeth sinking through the fabric. The stranger shouted, jerking back. Blood spotted the snow. "Get off, you little bastard!" he kicked out, catching Hunter in the ribs. The dog yelped but held on, growling even harder. Ellie recovered enough to jab the shovel handle into the man's chest. He staggered, slipped, and went down hard on one knee. Hunter released him only when Ellie shouted, "Back, Hunter!" The stranger scrambled up, clutching his bleeding arm. Something small and metallic fell from his coat, a compact black device the size of a matchbox. He looked at it, cursed, and turned to run. Ellie raised her shovel again, but he was already sprinting toward the woods, vanishing into the pines. The sound of his boots faded into silence, leaving only the ragged sound of her breathing. Hunter limped back to her, sides heaving, blood streaking his muzzle. Not his own, she realized, but the attacker's. She dropped to her knees, hugging him. "You brave boy," she whispered, trembling. "You saved me." Her hands shook as she picked up the dropped device. It was cold and smooth, with a blinking red light, a GPS tracker. Someone had been tracing her movements, or maybe Hunter's. Within the hour, Ben arrived, summoned by her frantic phone call. He brought with him Deputy Mark Leland, a lean man in his early 40s with sun-worn skin, tired eyes, and a scar along his jawline that gave him a permanent half-scowl. Mark had been Frank's friend years ago, back when he was a rookie deputy. The loss of that mentor had turned him cautious, quiet, the kind of man who studied every word before saying it. Ben examined Ellie's bruised arm while Mark crouched by the tracker, turning it over in gloved fingers. "Military grade," he muttered. "Or close enough. Whoever your visitor was, he's not some random hunter. I told you, Ellie said. This has to do with Silver Peak Kennels. Ben sighed. Ellie, you can't keep getting mixed up in this. Let the sheriff handle it. And what? She snapped. Wait up here alone while whoever killed that mother dog comes back for the pup? Mark looked up, meeting her gaze. She's right about one thing, he said. If they were willing to trespass, they'll come back to finish the job. The three of them drove later that afternoon to follow the tracker's signal. The road wound deep into the forest, past frozen creeks and long shadows where the sun never reached. Snow began falling again, light but steady. After several miles, the GPS pinged stronger. They parked and continued on foot, the woods closing around them like a cathedral of silence. Eventually, they found it, a cluster of old storage barns half hidden by overgrowth and snowdrifts. The metal siding was rusted, the doors chained but loosely. Mark cut the lock with bolt cutters from his truck. Inside, the air reeked of rot, straw, and something darker, fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, some empty, others stained with old blood. In the far corner lay the skeletal remains of a dog, collar still around its neck. Ben's face tightened. Dear God. Mark snapped photos, speaking low into his radio. Found evidence of illegal animal breeding, possibly tied to Silver Peak. Need backup. A metallic clatter echoed from somewhere behind the barn. The three froze. Hunter growled softly. Mark motioned for silence, drew his pistol, and crept toward the sound. When he returned, he carried a half-burned box marked SPK Supplies. Inside were injection vials, metal tags, and a stack of invoices dated within the past month. They're still active, Ben said grimly. Ellie felt her knees weaken. And they know I have one of their dogs. Dusk, they'd secured the site for investigators, though none of them truly believed the culprits were gone. On the drive back, Ellie sat in the truck's back seat with Hunter's head resting on her lap. His breathing had steadied, but when she touched his ribs, he flinched. He'll be all right, Ben said quietly from the driver's seat. Bruised, not broken. Ben, Ellie murmured, what if they come tonight? They won't, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Not in a storm. But storms were what these men thrived in. That night, the wind picked up again. Snow swept down the valley in white sheets, and somewhere beyond the ridge, an orange glow flickered briefly against the clouds. Ellie stood by her window, heart sinking. Ben, she whispered into the phone, look east. Do you see that? Static answered, then his voice. I see it. That's the barn. Within minutes, the glow turned to flame. Thick smoke rose above the trees, black against the blizzard sky, and the fire spread fast, too fast for natural cause. It was the Silver Peak men, erasing what was left. Ellie watched helplessly as the reflection of fire danced in Hunter's eyes. He pressed against her leg, whining softly, as if understanding something she didn't. By dawn, all that remained of the barn was smoke and silence. And in that silence, Ellie knew one thing with cold certainty. This wasn't over. The flames still haunted Ellie's dreams. Even after days, the smell of burnt pine clung to her clothes and hair, and when she closed her eyes, she could still see the orange glow bleeding through the snowstorm, devouring the forest where the old barns had stood. She hadn't slept properly since that night. Every gust of wind against the cabin walls made her flinch. Every creak of wood turned her heart to ice. Hunter, now 4 months old, rarely left her side. His limp had healed slowly, but not completely. His right hind leg still favored the ground, though he moved with stubborn energy, as if refusing to accept weakness. Deputy Mark Leland came by that morning, his patrol truck crunching through the frost. He stepped out wearing his usual brown jacket and sheriff's star pinned to the chest, his breath fogging in the cold. Beneath the stoicism, there was fatigue. The dark rings under his eyes told Ellie he hadn't rested either. We caught one of them, he said without preamble. Name's Ray Dalton. Small-time thug used to run security for Silver Peak Kennels before the shutdown. He claims he doesn't know who ordered the fire, but... Mark exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I think he's lying. Ellie poured him coffee as he sat by the fire. The scar on his jaw caught the light, a reminder of another raid years ago, one that had nearly cost him his life. She remembered Frank telling her that Mark had taken a bullet meant for a partner and never quite recovered from the guilt that followed. That scar, she thought, wasn't just on his skin. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Sheriff wants to close it as an arson case tied to poaching," he said. "But Ben and I think it goes deeper. Silver Peak had ties with law enforcement once, contracts, old debts, maybe protection. There's someone higher pulling the strings." Ellie's gaze drifted to the window, where snow was falling again in soft, steady flakes. "Then you can't fight them alone." Mark smiled faintly, the first real warmth she'd seen from him. "Good thing I've got backup." He nodded toward Hunter, who was lying near the hearth, gnawing at an old boot. "That little guy's got more guts than half my squad." That afternoon, Ben arrived with medical supplies and a grim expression. He was bundled in his thick parka, beard frosted, his usual calm replaced by something sharper, determination edged with worry. "Mark just called me," he said, setting down a box. "They're moving in tonight. We found more GPS pings near the northern ridge. Somebody's been using the caves there, probably a backup hideout. We're going to end this." Ellie's pulse quickened. "And you're going with them?" Ben nodded. "They'll need someone who knows the area. Besides, I owe those animals something." He glanced at Hunter. "And we could use his nose." "Absolutely not," Ellie protested. "He's still a puppy, Ben." "He's been through enough." But Hunter was already standing, tail low, eyes locked on Ben as if he understood every word. He gave a short as sharp bark, impatient, insistent. Ellie sighed, her heart tight. "You're just like Frank," she whispered. "Never knew when to stay home." By dusk, the rescue convoy had gathered at the base of the ridge. 2 sheriff trucks, 1 snowmobile, and a rescue van with Ben's medical gear. The air was bitter cold, the wind carrying whispers through the trees. Mark handed Ellie a radio. "Stay at the cabin. If anything happens, I'll call." But Ellie didn't stay. Half an hour later, she was trudging behind the group, wrapped in Frank's old coat, ignoring the ache in her joints. She moved silently, staying behind the snowdrifts, unwilling to be left behind again while others faced the storm. The deeper they climbed, the darker it became. The moon vanished behind clouds, and the only light came from flashlights glinting off the snow. Hunter led the way, nose low, body tense. Every so often he'd stop, sniff the air, then move again with purpose. The path narrowed into a frozen ravine, lined by jagged rock walls dusted white. Suddenly Hunter stopped dead, ears pricked. His growl rolled low and dangerous. A second later, a gunshot cracked the air. Snow burst near Ben's boots. "Down!" Mark shouted, diving behind a fallen log. Return fire erupted, flashes lighting the dark like lightning trapped between trees. The smell of gunpowder mixed with cold pine and smoke. Hunter darted forward before Ellie could stop him, barking furiously. He disappeared behind a rock outcrop. Ellie's scream tore through the chaos. "Hunter!" Mark cursed, moving to cover her. "Stay back!" But she didn't. She followed the barking until she reached a small clearing lit by the orange flicker of torches. There, half hidden behind a rocky ledge, was a crude trapdoor built into the ground. Hunter was clawing at it, barking madly. Ben ran up beside her, pulling the door open. The stench hit them first. Animal sweat, fear, damp straw. Below, cages lined the narrow chamber. Inside, eyes glowed in the dark. Dogs, dozens of them, trembling but alive. "We found it," Ben breathed. "We found their holding pit." As they began unlocking cages, another shot rang out. Mark fired back, hitting one of the gunmen in the shoulder. The other tried to run, slipping on the ice. Hunter lunged, teeth flashing, knocking the man down until Mark cuffed him. The chaos ended as quickly as it had begun. Fire spread from one of the fallen torches, catching the dry straw near the entrance. Flames leapt high, greedy and fast. "Get the dogs out!" Ben shouted. Ellie grabbed the nearest leash, guiding frightened animals up the slope while smoke clawed at her lungs. Hunter limped beside her, blood streaking his paw but refusing to stop. By the time the last dog was free, the entire pit was burning. Ellie collapsed against a snowbank, coughing. Ben knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "You're all right," he said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "We did it." In the distance, the first red lights of sheriff trucks cut through the storm. Mark stood guard over the captured men, their faces pale against the fire's glow. When dawn finally broke, the valley was still. Smoke drifted like ghosts between the pines. Hunter lay beside Ellie, head resting on her boot, tail thumping weakly. His paw was bandaged now, but his eyes were bright, full of quiet triumph. Ellie looked toward the rising sun, her voice barely a whisper. "You brought them justice, boy." Then softer, "And you brought me back to life." Spring in Montana didn't arrive gently. It crept down from the mountains like a shy guest, melting the snow in quiet breaths. Patches of green began to show near the riverbank, and for the first time in months, Ellie could smell the earth again. The air was soft, fragrant with thawing pine. Hunter, now a full-grown German shepherd, ran ahead through the meadow, his coat sleek and gleaming in the morning sun. His limp had faded into memory, though a faint scar along his leg told the story of that night in the burning woods. He was no longer the frightened pup Ellie had rescued. He was a rescuer now. After the Silver Peak arrests, the sheriff's department founded a small search and rescue unit for the surrounding counties. Deputy Mark Leland headed it, and when he suggested recruiting Hunter, Ellie had hesitated. "He's been through enough," she said, but Mark had only smiled. Sometimes purpose heals what time can't. Now, months later, Ellie stood by proudly as Hunter wore his red service vest, nose to the ground, tail alert. She'd joined the team too, not in the field, but as their quartermaster, the one who brewed the coffee, cleaned gear, and kept everyone grounded with gentle humor. Mark had changed as well. The hard lines in his face had softened. He often stopped by Ellie's cabin to check on her, sometimes staying long enough for a quiet dinner of venison stew and black coffee. She had learned about his past, how he'd once been married, how his wife had left after his obsession with duty consumed him. Now, when he spoke to Ellie, there was a tenderness in his voice that carried both regret and respect. "Frank would have been proud," he told her one evening. "You didn't just save a dog, Ellie. You saved yourself." One morning in late April, a distress call came through. A 7-year-old boy named Tommy Whitaker had gone missing near the Gallatin River during a family picnic. His mother, a petite woman with honey blonde hair named Karen Whitaker, was hysterical, her voice breaking over the radio. "He wandered off chasing a butterfly. Please, God, he's scared of the dark." Ellie's heart clenched. She knew that fear. She had lost Sarah once in the woods when her daughter was 5, just for 10 minutes, but the memory still haunted her. By noon, the search and rescue team mobilized. Hunter leapt from the truck the moment the door opened, sniffing the boy's jacket that Karen clutched to her chest. The air was still cool, the smell of wet pine sharp and alive. "Find him, Hunter," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling with both pride and prayer. The dog took off, weaving through the brush with disciplined precision. Ellie and Mark followed close behind. Hours passed, the light dimming to gold. When they reached the riverbank, Mark signaled for a halt. "Tracks," he said, crouching. Small footprints led toward the water, then stopped. Ellie's stomach twisted, but Hunter didn't pause. He barked once, running downstream. And after 200 yards, they found the boy crouched beneath a fallen log, shivering, his little arms wrapped around his knees. His cheeks were streaked with tears and mud. Hunter approached slowly, lowering his body until his head was level with the child's. He gave a soft whine and nudged the boy's hand. Tommy blinked, then reached out, gripping Hunter's fur as if it were the only solid thing in the world. "I was scared," he whispered. Ellie knelt beside him, wrapping him in her coat. "You're safe now, sweetheart. He found you." News spread quickly. The next day, a local photographer snapped a picture. An old woman in a red flannel coat kneeling in the snow, arms around a black and tan German shepherd, both looking toward the sunrise. The image went viral. "The Guardian of Gallatin," the paper called it. Letters poured in from across the state. Schools invited Ellie to speak. Veterans wrote to thank her for reminding them that purpose doesn't fade with age. That evening, as the sun sank behind the pines, Ellie walked to the small hill behind her cabin where Frank's headstone stood. She placed a wildflower bouquet at its base. Hunter lay beside her, his head resting on her knee, watching the wind ripple through the grass. "You see, Frank," she said softly. "He did it. The dream you had, to save lives. He's everything you wanted him to be." The sky deepened to violet, and the first stars appeared. Hunter lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound of distant owls. Ellie smiled faintly. "Go on, boy," she whispered. "Run. You've earned your freedom." Hunter rose, trotted a few paces toward the tree line, then turned back. His amber eyes met hers, glowing in the twilight. She laughed quietly, brushing away a tear. "All right then," she murmured. "Maybe not tonight." Above them, the wind carried the scent of rain and pine, a promise of new beginnings. Sometimes, miracles don't come as thunder or light. They come quietly, in the shape of a loyal dog, an old woman's courage, or a simple act of love that defies the coldest winter. Ellie never set out to become a hero. She just listened, to a cry in the blizzard, to the whisper in her heart that said, "Go help," even when fear told her to stay inside. And maybe that's how God works, not always through grand signs, but through ordinary hands that choose compassion over comfort. Every sunrise over Montana reminded Ellie that faith is not about seeing, it's about believing that the smallest kindness can change a life. Hunter was more than a rescue dog. He was a living prayer, a quiet answer from heaven to a heart that had stopped hoping. And maybe that's the message for all of us, that love, when freely given, becomes its own miracle. You don't need to move mountains to do God's work. Sometimes you just need to open your door in a storm. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can feel its warmth. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the quiet miracles God still places in our path. May the Lord bless you, guide your steps, and remind you no act of kindness is ever too small for heaven to notice.